we are already lines with live stream.
So we are going ahead without the background, Soma.
Yeah, if that is not possible now, let's go on.
Okay.
Look, Lina, can you just put background? Possible for you?
Just trying, actually. I'm with the IT person only. I'm just trying on it, but somehow.
And just adjust your screen so that at least you are visible appropriately.
Little behind, huh? Yeah.
That okay, or should I?
Go a bit far, yeah.
Should I let people in? There are 50 people and we are already live on YouTube.
I think we should start, yes.
Yeah, so over to you, Dr. Yamuna. All the best, everyone. I'm letting them in.
A very good evening to one and all who have joined with us for this last session of our pre-conference webinar of 9th International Patient Safety Conference. This is the last session among all our webinars. I would like to welcome all the audience who have joined with us through Zoom platform as well as through YouTube. As a Apollo person, we are very delighted to have this conference organizing for the 9th time. And since every topic which is important as a part of patient safety cannot be incorporated as a whole in the conference, few of the topics have been considered for webinar. And of course, we also have a pre-conference workshop on 11th Feb. So a kind request to all the audience who are joining with us on the online platform, please keep your mic on mute mode and also switch off your video. We will be taking question and answer session towards the end of the topic. We have two wonderful speakers for the evening today who will be discussing with us the most relevant topic, which is a burning topic in the field of medicine. So kindly have your questions in mind and start typing your questions in the chat box. So towards the end of the session, we will be taking it. So over to the first speaker. I'll be introducing now Dr. Lina. She is a head and senior consultant microbiology and infection control from Apollo Indraprastha Hospital, New Delhi. She has many publications in peer-reviewed national and international journals. She has also been a faculty at national workshop, CME, and conference. She is also actively involved at the level of her hospital and also other organization-wide multiple training programs. She is also a reviewer of national journals. She will be talking on the subject safety principles of single-use device framework. That is what I mentioned in the beginning, which is a burning topic. If we want to reuse certain single-use devices in the hospital, either it is for environmental protection or as a part of cost effectiveness. So she will give us an overview or as a framework or as a program, how we need to set up in an organization. Over to you, Dr. Lina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yamuna, and all the organizers for this wonderful opportunity and interaction. I would be very brief because in this frame, I would like to be, touching on everything, but maybe not elaborating, and we can always have a one-on-one later on. So, is my screen visible? Is the slides visible?
No, it's not.
Yeah,
Dr. Lina, it's still not visible.
I've just shared it. I thought I'd shared it.
Yeah, now it's visible. Yeah, now we can see the slides.
Okay, so thank you. So before I carry on, always a word of acknowledgement for my respected teachers. I especially remember Dr. Raman Sedana, And he is still guiding us on for all the wonderful infection control program practices that he has set up, and especially this SUD program. So thank you, sir. And we move on. So before we go on to the crux, let's just recall what exactly are these reusable medical devices, or what we say as the single use. Okay, so reusable would be devices that healthcare providers can reprocess and reuse on multiple patients as per manufacturer's instructions. And as per definition, Spalding criteria, we do have them into critical, like the surgical forceps, or semi-critical, like the endoscopes, or non-critical, like the stethoscopes. So what are the single-use device? A device that is intended for one use or on a single patient during a single procedure. So the labeling identifies the device as disposable and does not provide instructions for reprocessing. So that is what is the challenge. And what do we mean by reprocessing? Because we will be mentioning it on and on in our slides. It's basically refers to pre-cleaning, cleaning, sterilization, repackaging, labeling, and returning the device to a specified condition and performance. Why this concept of single-use device is very clear. Economically, we are benefiting on it. So it substantially lowers the cost of a single procedure. The concerns remain like inadequate reprocessing between patient users, infections, and adverse reactions not necessarily related to the infections. So to address this, we need to have a very robust SOP for our single-use devices. And let's go step by step on that. First is the formation of a committee, because it needs to be a multidisciplinary. There needs to be members from the management side, the materials purchase who are actually doing the representatives from the finance, CSSD, biomedical, the user ends itself, because they are the ones using it, quality and infection control. So this is a crux, but of course, this can change as per your own hospital setup. And the very first thing before we identifying the device, not all items can classify for SUD. Now, this is very, very important. It is not possible that you just take a device because it's high cost and you take.
Dr. Leena, sorry to interrupt in between the talk. I think you have to a little bit adjust your screen, or if it's not possible, you can stop your video, or you can minimize the video a little bit.
Okay.
Or you can come to the front of the screen, because your face is not completely visible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it any better now?
It's good. It's good. Now it's very good.
Okay. So I'll carry on.
And please proceed, ma'am.
Okay. So, so we need to be very sure about which item we are actually classifying for the single-use device. And there are many critical questions to ask before we move on to the next part. So when we identify, we need to know, can this item be effectively cleaned? There are very difficult to clean items at times. So for example, you have a long, narrow lumen item, and maybe with just a single opening. So you need to really think about it. Again, what is the material being used of the item, and what is the geometry of the medical devices? Are there many turnings, many loops, which will make it very difficult or almost impossible to be cleaned? Again, the cost effectiveness. So the cost effectiveness of the item versus the entire reprocessing procedure, including the cleaning, the sterilization, the validation, the relevant documentation. Again, can the item be effectively sterilized? So will it meet, will the item, will the performance be same as before once it is sterilized? So the material has to be really looked into. Again, while we are sterilizing, sometimes there are items which will just absorb the sterile and it will not, it will give very toxic residues in that. So in that case, we need to be very sure. So these are just some very basic critical questions that we need to ask before we identify on to which item to be classified as SUD. Moving on, when you have an SOP and you've identified the item, for that particular device, you need to have very specific processes in control. So the reprocessing, the area needs to be identified, the cleaning, decontamination protocol, the inspection part, which we will dwell on further in our slides, drying of the item, inspection, which is all actually a part of reprocessing, the packaging, labeling, yes, very specific to the sterilization and specific to the SUD also. The types of sterilizations that can be performed, the storage, the distribution, and specific to the single-use device, the number of reuses, the discarding criteria. Again, any adverse event, is it happening? And reporting of that, how would you term an event as adverse? How are you monitoring it? And in case any SUD needs to be recalled, documentation of that, monitoring and review of the entire program. Not forgetting the staff safety. We are talking about patient safety, but yes, staff safety, very utmost, and of course, the quality assurance. So the entire SOP should have all these points in hand. The reprocessing in itself, the cleaning is the most important part of it. So should be initiated as early as possible. And the sorting of the items according to the method of cleaning. For example, there may be a non-lumen item, or there may be a lumen, an item with a lumen. So in that case, you need to do repeated flushing, brushing multiple times. Again, there may be many device specifics. For example, some item may not be immersible in the enzymatic detergent, something which has an electric connection to it. So an electric cable maybe, but you need to be reusing it. So your method of cleaning should be specific to that kind of item. Of course, the use of enzymatic detergent is used almost in all, and the manufacturer's instructions need to be followed for how much time you need to be actually immersing in that. Mostly it's an alkaline detergent that is to be used, and you can make use of either manual cleaning or the automated, which may involve the thermal washer disinfector or the ultrasonic, again depending on your type of item that is used. Going on to the drying and inspection part, ensure that it is drying, because any moisture that is left, that item should not be used at all. So ensure that you can either take the help of compressed air, which is oil and moisture free. The alcohol flush may be used to facilitate the drying, and in some cases, the device is very delicate. It may not be able to withstand the air pressure. In that case, atmospheric drying may be carried out, but again in a very safe condition. So after that, inspect it for complete dryness, see if there's any damage done so far, and again the functional integrity. So only if these things are found satisfactory, the device is processed further for sterilization. So packaging have a separate designated area. Now, I'm not really going on to the very details of this because the reprocessing part is going to be a separate, chapter in itself. So we'll touch about the main things that are applicable to the single-use devices. So obviously the packaging should be again compatible to the type of sterilization being carried out. Packaging is very, very important. Appropriate packaging will ensure sterility, and the items, they need to be packaged in the open or unlocked position with double wrapping. The sealing, again, mostly with the help of the sealing machine, and very important to maintain the integrity of the entire sterilization item. The labeling conforming to the sterilization, including all things with the help of the gun can be used, like the name of the sterilizer, the size, the number of uses, the date of last use, the date of sterilization, the cycle number, and the date of expiry related to the sterilization. So this is a sterilization specific label that we are right now talking about. The process needs to be very strictly controlled, very, very important, with the help of indicators. So the Bowie test can be made use of, biological indicators, which we are using in every pack. And again, inside the process challenge device, various indicators can be made use of. Reuses. Now, one needs to have a very clear method for labeling the reprocessed device, and again, marking for successive reprocessing episodes. So this may be done either in the form of permanent marking on that item. Again, one has to see that you do not compromise on the sterility of the item while it is being done, and it should indicate the number of times it has been used. Or otherwise, in case the item is such that one cannot make a mark on that item, one needs to keep a track record of that article through appropriate documentation. Now, the possibility and the number of times that a device can be reused, this should be based on available literature or evidence, and the committee, the reuse committee such, has to make a final call on it. So before sending the device for reprocessing, verify that the device can still be reused and that it has not exceeded the approved number of uses as per the policy. So once the process has been done, we need to also have the discarding very clear as when to discard it. Firstly, foremost, as per the number of reuses. If your device is still fine and it can be reused further, but if it is meant the number of reuses, you cannot be reusing it further. So discard and document that it has been discarded due to it meeting the number of reuses. Again, one needs to have a specific rejection criteria, very specific to that device. For example, if it is a lumen or something, and maybe sometimes after 2 or 3 uses, the blood clot sometimes gets just stuck there. It just does not get dislodged. And once that is there, one should not be using it, even if you have not met the maximum number of reuses you have specified. So that can be one of your rejection criteria. Or maybe some part of it is damaged, the tip has broken. So one needs to frame all these rejection criteria, 1, 2, 3, very specific to the device that you are using as an SUD. And in case you're devising according any of these criteria, if you're discarding, you need to document it again. Traceability is very essential of the patient versus the device, and the device versus the patient. That means for any device, your tracking mechanism should be such that you should be able to know that you have done patient X, Y, A, B, C, D with with this device. Or this patient, if you pick up any patient, you should be able to track down that yes, in this patient, we had used such and such SUD at that time. So your documentation needs to be very essentially tracked down for that. You can have an elaborate documentation which tracks down that previous sterilization date, what are the number of times that it has been used, and sometimes one does use a performer which is related to the number of reuses. For example, if a particular item has 4 reuses, then the columns are 4 and not beyond that, so that that alert level goes up when you reach the 3rd time. Now, that needs to be devised at the institutional end with the help of the committee, and one can explore different technology and the RFID for tracking down various items. There needs to be a protocol in place for any adverse events. So be in touch with the treating team. It may not necessarily be an infection. It may be just any other adverse event. Maybe something like a recall from the manufacturer end also. So these things need to be kept in mind. It can be just a malfunction. It may not be a serious event like an infection leading to a patient, but it may be a malfunction of the item, which has happened prior to the maximum number of reuses. So that needs to be tracked down by the committee so that you can make use of it. And whether you think the requirement is there to come down to the number of uses that you have tracked for it. So the protocol for recall has to be in place, and it would be a good idea to have a mock recall in place so that you know how to be doing about it. Monitoring, of course, audits will go on. So, audit the discarded prior to when it could have been reused further, and why was it discarded earlier than the maximum reuse. Again, the healthcare staff, have they been trained enough? That is very important. Their competency is very important. Are they aware of the fact that it is a single-use device? You know, the ground level, the ground staff users need to be very well aware of that. Monitor the patients for infections. For that, it is very important. You are tracking down your part, but your interaction with the treating team is also very important. And periodically keep on reviewing the use and methods with the committee itself, the reuse committee. So you can have various surveillance tools. One of them that we make use of is the ATP monitor incubator, which we use to check for any organic residue post-cleaning. And because it is like a bedside test with the help of a special incubator, it will tell us there and then whether it has passed the criteria for cleaning. It is prior to sterilization. And one has to remember that especially for single-use device, this cleaning part is very important. So that needs to be really verified well. One is the visual check, yes, but sometimes some things may get missed out on that. So one can make use of tools like this. Again, documentation. Reuse is not a harmless procedure. We need to remember that. So your documentation needs to be very intact at all levels and at all ends. So keep on tracking that down. Have a word with the healthcare staff, because their safety, other than the standard precautions, are they using the proper PP during the handling of devices? Is the safety toolkit there in place? The safety, the PP box, the safety box, the eye wash station. Are they aware about the sharps injuries, because they're dealing with all types of sharps? And what is the action plan in case they get a sharp? So their awareness and their competencies need to be handled time and time, every time. And of course, not to forget the challenges for the single-use device. That is definitely there, because each device has unique challenges to cleaning again. So if you can just see here, outside everything seems clean and nice, but actually inside, you can actually see with the help of a special fluorescent light that there is organic debris there. Again, the manufacturers do not provide the instructions for the reprocessing. So that is something that you need to work out. You may have certain simulations in that case, or you can discuss it with the committee or take some scientific literature, whatever is available. The verification of cleanliness, the functionality, the performance of the device after usage and the reprocessing always remains a challenge. Again, not to forget about the prion diseases such as CJD. We are reusing items, but items, if the patient has something like this, it may be resistant to the routine sterilization methods. And to top it all, we do have a paucity of data on such things. Events may be happening. Again, sometimes the disclosure of the events is not there at times because there are a lot of implications which happens. The ethical issues definitely needs to be taken a call by the reuse committee on which patients, on whom are you using a re-sterilized device, and about the informed patient consent. So this is something which is institutional specific for your committee to work out and to have it in place so that there's no complication later on. So to summarize, not all SUDs are suited for reprocessing. This is very essential. Many times one comes under pressure, maybe by the consultants or by the management that, this particular item is high priced, let's look into it. Do evaluate, but again, if you think there is a particular challenge, line of the equipment, it cannot be cleaned, then not to be accepted for a single-use device. Determine if the reprocessing is cost justified. Weight versus the entire costing, starting from the initial cleaning to the documentation, to the audits, to the verification. Again, the device-specific protocols is very essential. Especially for SUDs, you will have a whole spectrum of devices which are very different. There may be something being used in the OT, there may be something being used in the DSA lab, which are very different. You cannot have a common cleaning protocol for a lumen device and for a solid item. So you have to have very device-specific protocols for this cleaning process, and do take the help of the user end for this. Again, the number of items, every item can be reprocessed. It should be limited and supervised. So do it till a time you think is comfortable and to which point you can take it easily. Maybe with the event of time, you can extend the reuses, but to start with, put a limit to it, and it should be a consensus by all the committee members on it. The quality assurance, of course, it cannot be undermined, the documentation and the continued surveillance for adverse events. This is very, very essential because sometimes you may need to just strike an item off the SUD list of some adverse event. Again, keep on reviewing the protocol and results with the committee, explore the use of technology. In case a third-party reprocessor is involved, the user responsibility still remains. Check out all the credentials, that is very, very essential. And most of all, be aware of the complications which are related to the reused items, because unless you're aware of the complication, you may not be able to track it out. So that tracking mechanism needs to be very, very robust. You need to know that if a patient has met any kind of adverse event, maybe has to be readmitted. When you are going through the track record, you should be able to track out, was any SUD used on such and such patient? And if so, at what time was it used? So have it all in place. Only then you can think of a cost-effective healthcare once your entire SOP is in place. So thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leena. That was a very elaborate session on how to create a framework on the reuse of single-use devices by giving us a complete strategy how to look into it. And we will be going on. Please do be connected with us because we will be taking up the question and answer session once the second speaker finishes this topic. And it was a bang on. You completed your session according to the time given to you. So now I would like to invite Dr. Shashank to speak on the next topic related to single-use device, which would be on reuse, risk, and the precautions which we need to follow as an organization whenever we are planning to put things in place to reuse certain single-use devices. Dr. Shashank Devapur is an infection prevention and quality implementation consultant for hospitals and healthcare organization, and he has over 15 years of excellence in clinical research, pharmaceutical and medical devices. He is currently the co-founder and CEO of Inflexon Healthcare Services and director of Sagre Technologies Private Limited, Bangalore. He has so far trained more than 250 professionals across India for the International Infection Control Course certification, first ever in India. And he has also helped over 60 hospitals in putting protocols in place related with operation theater, intensive care units, or CSST. And he has also trained over 100 CSST technicians for the professional course for CSST technicians. And he is also a technical editor for CPHIC Basic Manual and also a member of Governing Council of Consortium of Accredited Healthcare Organization, which is CAHO. Now I would request Dr. Shashank to give us an elaborate talk on the reuse of single-use device, the risk and the precautions which has to be carried out. Over to you, Dr. Shashank.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Yamuna. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. I think quite a long, elaborate introduction. That too in such a esteemed panelist that we have today. I think Dr. Leena did a fantastic job of making my job a lot more easier because Madam has covered pretty much everything that is there. So what I would like to focus on is a lot of our talks and topics may be a little similar. So you may see us sharing some of the other similar sort of content that is there. But I would like to, as I always like, I like to talk more on the practical side of things and see, what questions we can answer on a practical side. And obviously, we'll have the question answer session over there. We'll do that. And again, to begin with, I would like to thank the organizers of IPSC, the International Patient Safety Program, this great program that Apollo has been a part of. Thanks so much for Mr. Gaurav Loria, everybody else who's invited me. Thanks again. So can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, so in terms of looking at what we'll be trying to cover, as I said, Leena Madam has done a fantastic job of covering most of this. We will just focus on a few of the small points, the important points that are there. Next slide, please. So I think this is something that we've already covered some time back. As we talked about, a single-use device is what is defined by the manufacturer as something that cannot be reused, and it's only intended to be used only once on one patient that is there. But because of the various challenges that we currently face, we see that there is a need for reusing some of these devices. And as Dr. Leena said, it is important to understand that which sort of devices can be reused or which cannot be reused. Yes, can we go on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so that is the kind of symbol that you will kind of see where it says second time you cannot be reused. So if you see that kind of symbol, that it clearly tells you that it cannot be reused. So if you look at the packaging of your device, this is what you'll kind of see on that. Next slide. So can I press next? Yes. Okay. So as I said, some of the facts that you see over here is that in the US itself, there is about 20 to 30% of devices which are being currently reused. And if you see, not all devices could be reused, but if you look at most of developing countries like India, you would see that almost 80 to 90% of single-use devices are being reused. Now, reuse currently in India as a regulatory requirement, as rules require, as per what the manufactured devices, it cannot be reused. But as per what NMH defines us, which we will talk about a little later, you will see that it does allow you to reuse single-use devices as long as you have a clear set of policy that is being documented and it is being followed as per the rules and regulations that has been set up by the hospital themselves. Okay, so going ahead, as we said, continued surveillance is very important. This is an important aspect that you need to look at, is that you constantly monitor and track what is going on, as mentioned by my previous speaker. And one of the things that you'll also be looking at is the cost reduction that is there. But this cost reduction should not come at the safety of the patient, and the patient should be aware when we talk about what kind of device is being used on them, so that they know that there is a reusable device that's being used on them. Yeah, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so if you look at the definition which the CDC talks about, the sterilization guidelines way back in 2008, and there you would see that it clearly states that the US FDA says that if a hospital needs to reuse a single-use device in the US, now this is what is the older definition. Now there are a lot of hospitals saying that we cannot maintain the same sort of setup like a manufacturer. Now what a manufacturer has in a factory, the kind of sterility and the manufacturing process that is there, cannot be matched to something which is on a smaller scale that is meant in a hospital. But if you look at the strict definition by the US FDA, that is what they say, is that whenever you're manufacturing or reprocessing any single-use device, you have to maintain the same sort of facilities which a manufacturer maintains over there. Now, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah. Now, again, over there, if you talk about US FDA classification, now, if you look at the Indian classification of the new MDR devices, as per the new MDR Act of 2017, which has been applicable from 1st of October of 2022, we have 4 classes of devices. We have class A, B, C, and D. C and D being a little more on the higher side in terms of invasive this thing, while in the US FDA, we talk about class 1, 2, and 3. 3 being the more of the invasive devices, which are usually single-use devices there. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at processing, now, as we said, most of the single-use classes of devices which can be used are the ones which fall into class 1 and 2. That's what most of the current regulation of the USPA talks about. But class 3 devices, which are reusable single-use devices, like your catheters, your guide wires, and other things, should not be preferably used for reuse. But as we know here in India, a lot of these devices are being reused. Yes, next slide, please. Now, this is probably a little bit of a repetition from what Dr. Lina spoke about, is that the first thing is that here in India, you do not have to worry about why you're reusing a single-use device, because here most auditors, people who come for assessment, do understand the fact that reuse of single-use devices is important. But the important thing is that, are you following the right kind of the steps and processes which are required? So the first thing is that always make sure that you have a complete list of things that can be reused. Now, again, as my previous speaker talked about, is that not all devices can be reused. So make sure that only those devices which can be reused safely and reprocessed safely should be listed here. Which are the specialties? What is the entry serial number? How many times do you plan to reuse some of these devices? And how do you check the functionality? How will you check the traceability? And how will you have the recall policy? Along with all these other steps that will be very important in terms of tracking the traceability of this. Because probably compared to most of the other devices that you'll be reprocessing in the hospital, the traceability of a single-use device on how many times it has been reused before discarding becomes very important. Yeah, can we next slide, please? So if you look at the reprocessing of single-use devices, now on your left-hand side, you would see what is the typical steps. On the right-hand side, you would see the cycle which is followed for the sterilization of most regular reuse devices that you see in the CSSD. But one of the key marking differences that you will see is a marking that we will do in terms of how these reuse devices are done. We will go to a few slides later when we talk about the marking and how do you do the labeling and understanding how they're being reused. I think that is something that we'll look in a couple of slides. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah. So this is a very important thing that needs to be checked at the user department. So if you're looking at the cath lab, now after the cath lab uses the device and then does the basic pre-cleaning, it is important at that stage they check the functionality. For example, I know we have seen a number of cases where a guide wire has been reused while the tip has gone into the patient can come back out the second time. Then they do a pre-cleaning and they try to see if they can be reused again. You see that sometimes the tip has got kinked. It does not function as well as it's supposed to function. It does not rotate. It does not give you the torque that is required to do the maneuvers that are there. So these are some things that you need to check at the user level, and they need to approve, saying that if this is not functioning properly or is there is any visible damage. It is very important. So quick side note over here, whenever you're in the cath lab or in places where I know cath lab is probably an area where you'll see a lot of these single-use devices being used, please keep a lighted micro or a lens that is there to check the tips whether they're working properly. The same thing happens in the CSSD, but here definitely this is something that you may also want to keep in the cath lab, is a lighted lens. It's pretty simple. It's a manual lens just to see if the tips are working well or not. Yeah. Yes. Going on to the next slide, please. Yeah. So you can just press next one more. Yeah. So this is very important. I think is understanding that when you reject and discard. So as we said, once it reaches a maximum number of usages, you straight away discard it. But anytime before that, if there is a functionality or there is a damage that is there, if it needs discarded, kindly go ahead and discard it. Do not think that this is going to be an issue. The consultants will come back saying that why did you discard the device? Please understand that patient safety becomes the most important over here, because tomorrow, if let's say one of those guide wires or the catheters is a break and it gets lost into the the arteries, the coronary arteries, while doing a procedure in the cath lab, recovering that becomes a big challenge. So I would request that please make sure that these kind of rejection criteria are kept very strictly, just like you would keep for any other criteria. And remember, this can even happen at the first usage, it can happen on the second usage, it can happen on the fifth usage. So sometimes you cannot predict some of these outcomes that are there. So always be on the lookout if you find that there is a problem, if you find that there is any issues with the functionality, any visible damage or suspicion of a damage, please go ahead and discard it. Do not take a risk with the patient's life. Okay. Yeah. Going ahead. Next. Now, the reason why I say is that this is very important is that if it is the first time usage that is there, if a damage happens, the liability comes to an extent on the manufacturer. But if it is the second time you're reusing this device or third time, whatever, any of these reuses and there's a damage occurs, the patient is hurt or injured, then the hospital is liable, not the manufacturer. So this is something that you have to keep in mind whenever we talk about liability and insurance and all of these things. So please keep in mind of these things. Okay, going ahead, this is something that, could you just stay on the previous slide, please? Yeah. Is that probably was not mentioned earlier, is that whenever you finish the initial cleaning, you rinse it, you put it away, that is there. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention over here is whenever you do cleaning, please do not start cleaning with hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is a disinfectant. I know a lot of people try to soak it in hydrogen peroxide before sending it to the cath lab, but always soak it in an enzyme cleaner, a neutral pH-based enzyme cleaner, and then send it, or else use an enzyme cleaner with a disinfectant which is there. Sometimes dual action solutions are available. Those kind of solutions are also quite good. But once you do that, and then when you set it for drying, one of the things that we would try to avoid in many of these sensitive devices, which cannot handle a lot of air pressure, I would suggest always use a more better drying cabinet so that they allow you to dry the device completely. Because we have seen that whenever instruments are not cleaned and dried properly, there is a lot of transmission infection that are there. So that's the reason why I'm not sure you've heard of these cases. There have been a lot of cases where when we do cataract surgeries, the phaco tip is being reused. And many a times when this phaco is being reused, we see that the remnants of the the lens which is there, which is proteinaceous material, if it has not been cleaned and dried properly, it gets transmitted to the next patient, and there are a lot of cases of endophthalmitis that happen. So especially when you're dealing with these things, using a good neutral pH enzyme cleaner, as long as it's compatible with the device, and then allowing it to dry properly becomes very important. That is there. So kindly follow this tip that is there. Yeah, going ahead to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as I said, now I just want you to focus. I don't know whether this is so very clearly visible that is there, but if you see here, you would see that this is one of the common most things that most of us follow here in India is using a marking pencil to mark on the tip of the device somewhere which is not is that does not get erased very easily. Now usually this is also a practice, but sometimes many people when we show this to international infection control consultants, they say there's a concern of the kind of pen that's used. The ink could leach when you put it in a sterilizer. There is issues that it may leach and cause infections or reaction to the patient, or it may get erased. So other than this, now what could be the alternate solution that is there is that in case of cardiac catheters, which are usually the ones in India which are reused a lot, we could look at something called the sterilization marking tapes, which are also available. These are small rolls of tape which come in different colors, which also can be put around in an area which is very similar to this. As you can see, the cursor is being moved around by Dr. Soma. You can see that these are the areas that can be marked, or these can be put with a small sterilization tape. The good thing about these sterilization tape is that they allow the sterilant to penetrate, and they maintain the sterility of the device, and they do not get erased very easily. So this is something that you can also look at. This is something that we are also trying to work with a number of technology companies in terms of putting in RFID tags, if it is possible, something that can go compatible with this and have a much better traceability and trackability, so that you don't have to worry about keeping manual records, but you can actually get a system generated alert that says that this needs to be discarded. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we talked about the packing area. This is, I think, something that we've already seen earlier. This has to be in a clean, dry place that is there. So it's separated from the washing area so that it does not get any contamination from the washing side. Yes, next slide, please. Yeah, so when it comes to sealing and packing now, this is an area that I wanted to kind of slightly talk about. One, this thing is that two things is that always discard the original packaging material that is there, because the original packaging material which has been provided by the manufacturer has been suitable only for one-time use. So that means once you open it, the sterility is lost. So you can't re-sterilize using the same packaging that's there. Second thing is, if you are planning to do a double packaging sterilizing that's there, so you should always ensure that there is no inner folding that happens. So this is a very common mistake that happens. So whenever you're doing any kind of packaging, especially most of these are ETO packing. So always in ETO, what happens is that the packaging where the inner packing of the plastic side should face the plastic side, and the paper side should face the paper side. So this is something that is commonly mistaken, and using a good sealant machine becomes very important. A 4-layer sealing or a 3-layer sealing definitely would be a lot more safer and better for the patients to withstand the packaging that's there. Coming to labeling, I think this is something that we have already covered earlier, but just to talk about this, the labeling becomes extremely important, obviously, in terms of traceability. And for us, the most important is the number which is on the top left-hand corner or the right-hand corner, what we call as the batch number or a lot number. Now, whenever we're doing a recall, it is very important that this lot number gets properly designated and then recalled according to that. So that becomes an important this thing for processing and recalling the device. Now, in case of sterilization date, now this is always a little bit of a controversy between India and the West. Now, West looks at something called as event-related sterility, but India looks at time-related sterility. So this is an ongoing debate, but probably in India, till we probably evolve a little further in terms of our storage conditions and other things, we will probably still continue with the time-related sterility that's there. When it comes to SUD monitoring, having a proper label that's there. Now, it's very important that when you use labels like these on the packaging material, especially on the plastic side, it is important that they should allow the sterilant to penetrate. It should contain all the relevant details about what the device is, what is the procedure it's going to be used for, and how many times it is being reused, and when is it, if there is a recall, how do you track and trace all of these things. Now, what I'm showing you right now is sort of a manual system of doing it, or a semi-manual system of doing it, but all this system can be automated. We have seen a lot of hospitals where this entire label is generated automatically by just entering a few things on the system that is there in the CSSD. So definitely can be a lot more automated. Yeah, can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I think this is something that has been already talked about. I think the sterilization validation in terms of making sure that there's an external class 1 indicator on your packaging materials. There's an internal class 4 or a class 5 indicator inside the packaging, which ensures that the sterilant has penetrated inside the packaging, and the load is being monitored by a biological indicator. Very important that it should be for every load. Now, why I say every load is because in ETO it is definitely for every load that is there. So that needs to be monitored, and the result should be negative before using it, because most of these procedures that we do in cath lab involve putting an implant into the body, most of them. Now, especially if you're doing a PTCA or other things like that. So you're putting a stent into it. So any kind of implant-based surgeries need that the biological indicator result should be negative before you use it. So that's the reason why using of rapid biological indicators, which give you results anywhere from few minutes to few hours, a lot more safer to do that. And the picture that you see on your left-hand side, top left-hand side, is the Bovidic indicator in case if you're doing this through the steam. If you're having a vacuum-based steam sterilizer, please use a Bovidic indicator. Again, I'm saying when only if you have a pre-vacuum sterilizer. This is not for manual steam sterilizers. Yeah, can we go on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so when it comes to documentation, as we said, very, very important. This, I think, for people who are attending any kind of quality or patient safety, this thing, I think the previous speaker has also talked about this. Documentation, documentation, documentation. Very, very important. So it is very important in exactly knowing where and how this device is being used, which patient it was used, how was the result. All of those things need to be noted, because tomorrow you will have to do an internal audit yourself to see if there was any adverse event, was there any recall, or was there any damage, or the patient safe, all of those things. So documentation becomes extremely important. Next slide, please. So again, just a few more examples of, if you can see here, it clearly talks about what procedure was done, what was the patient, and all of those details. I'm sorry if by mistake I've shared any other patient safe details. I'll probably next time when you're putting it, you can blur some of those details, but these are some of the important details that you would see over here. Yeah, next slide, please. Again, this is what we call as the SUD register. So this is something like, as what Madam mentioned earlier, was that this is how they look in terms of how many times it's being reused, how it was reused, what was this thing. So you have a master registry of all single-use devices, of how they are being used, how they were discarded, and when they were discarded. Yeah, going ahead. So this is something that has been recent in terms of some of the ethical and the regulatory requirements, is that there are people who are mentioning right now here in India that you cannot, not tell the patient that they are being reused this thing. So it is very important when we talk about the cost to the patient, you tell patients what is the upfront cost if you're using a new device, what is the upfront cost if you're using a reusable device. Make them understand the risks and the benefits of using both of them, and let the patient make a choice of what they would like to go. And if they're going in for a reuse device, single-use device, please make sure that they sign the appropriate consent form for all of that. Now, this is a very touchy subject area. Not many people may agree with it, but this is going to come very soon to India, and this is something that we all have to be prepared about. Something that we need to make ourselves convinced, and then discuss with patients about this. So let them make the choice rather than you making the choice. Because I know the days of saying get us an Oxford catheter or a New York catheter probably may be a little limited now. Yeah, going ahead. Yeah, in terms of adverse events, as we said, since these are adverse events that have happened after reprocessing their own device, so develop your own adverse event form to report it and report it to your HICC committee, and then take a call on how you plan to, handle those questions that are there. Okay. Then going to the next slide. Next slide, please. So recall is very important. Could you just stay in the previous slide? Yeah, recall is also very important. So this is something that has to be done based on the HICC committees, or if there have been repeated incidents, or there is a report that comes from a manufacturer saying that a certain batch number had some faulty devices, so you may have to recall it. Yes, next slide, please. So this is one more thing that we need to focus on, is in case there's a sterilization failure. This is common. This is not just for SUDs, but in fact for all devices that go through the CSSD, is that you plan for a recall. In case there's a biological indicator failure, then the entire lot till the last biological indicator was negative has to be recalled. If it is just a class 1 or a class 4 or a class 5 failure, only that pack gets recalled. In case if it is a bovidic failure, then nothing else gets processed during this thing. So in case you want to know more, this is an important requirement both from the NABH point of view. It's there in the 5th edition. Reference is given below. Yeah, next slide, please. Safety of employees is very important, as we spoke about. Whenever you're dealing with reuse of such devices, personal protective equipment and proper precautions definitely need to be taken. Yeah, next slide, please. So validating of single-use devices, verification of single-use devices, just like as we spoke about earlier, not just about the functionality, but the entire process that we spoke about. What can be reused, what cannot be reused. Every stage you need to validate that. So can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, please click next. Yeah, so as I said, at every stage of your process, you need to validate each step that is there. So if you're looking at the responsibility of each of those departments, now some of them may slightly vary, some of them may be a little different for each of your hospitals, but this is a general guideline that we say is that, at every step of reusing a single-use device, validation becomes and verification becomes very important, is that you check whether what is happening. For example, if you want to check post cleaning and you want to check, as madam said, you can use an ATP device, or after the sterilization over, you randomly pick certain devices, take a swab and check whether there is any growth that happens. Can it be stored? How long can it be stored? Is the process being correct? All of that. And probably you may want to, at some point of time, look at some of the internal workings of some of these devices. And unfortunately, or for whether we want it or not, many of the single-use devices today are becoming more and more harder to actually process them. So that's something that you need to keep in mind when we talk about the process that is there. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is a quick summary of what is there in the NABH 5th edition. I'm sure most of you have seen this. So this basically talks about what is required in terms of 7C, in terms of overall requirements for reuse of single-use devices and other devices that are there. So important that, the number of reuses, the process of reuse should be clearly noted, and it should be a written document, and you should be able to validate it the same in front of your assessors when they come. Yeah. Okay, last but can you click on the next one? So last but not the least, I'm sorry if I've taken a little extra time. As I said, reuse of single-use devices is a risk to our job, and it helps reduce the risk for our patients and employees while delivering the best care that is there. So this is something that you have to understand, that use of single-use devices always is a risk. So it's our job to help reduce those risks for our patients and employees while we deliver the best care that is there. Yeah. So with that, I would like to say thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm sorry if I've taken a little extra time. Just wanted to revise some of those points that were there. Yeah, thank you so much.
Dr. Shashank, that was really a wonderful session on the precautionary methods and the risk associated. You were very kind enough to give so many good examples or tips which people often face on ground, the practical issues which the people on the ground who reprocess face it. Of course, the policies are prepared by policy makers, but at the ground level are the people who face so many issues which may not even be at times escalated to the policy makers. So those tips were really helpful. I'm very sure that each one of us had such kind of risk or such kind of challenges while reprocessing single-use devices. Now, over on to the question and answer session. There is a question, I think, which is pertaining to Dr. Leena. Can we fix the number of time or the costly items which we can reuse? As it, I think the question, what they want to frame is the number of time usage directly proportional to the cost of the single-use device?
Okay, so the number of times it can be reused should not have a bearing on the cost, in the sense, I'll just tell you, one has to be, I mean, the committee has to fix the number of times of reuses as per the evidence available. Now, many times the limitation is there may not be much evidence available for that particular device that we are talking about. In that case, try to get some recommendation from the manufacturer, some more material from the manufacturer, some scientific document from the manufacturer. And in case that is also not available, then it has to be an expert consensus experience from the committee itself. So one has to look at all these things. The most required is scientific evidence, which should be the gold standard in this case. And the cost, yes, the cost can decide that this item needs to be taken up for a single use. But the number of reuses, one has to base on all these things.
Yeah, well, very well said, Dr. Leena. Thank you very much. The cost is not the alone factor which decides the number of times a particular device has to be reused. Next question to Dr. Shashank. What is the role of materialovigilance in single-use device program?
I think this is something very related to the slide that I'd shown, is about talking about adverse events. It's very similar to your pharmacovigilance. As I said, pharmacovigilance is more of a regulatory requirement in terms of drugs and medical devices. Now, as I said, the liability does not lie with the manufacturer to report adverse event or a problem if it is a single-use device which is being reused. Now, if it had happened on the first use, it is acceptable. They will take up this thing. But if it is a reuse this thing, you will have to report this internally within your own committee, which will probably involve the HICC and the working department that is looking at this. So it will be an internal review, and which we can send it out by expert consensus. But now, my experience is when you work with industry on these kind of things, now industry will always like to sell you a product, firsthand. They would never want to sell you something that is secondhand. So getting help from them is always a little limited. So this is my personal experience in the last 15 years. But it's, as Dr. Leena said, it should be an expert consensus within the hospital, or maybe within a peer group that is there. So yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shashank. Someone has picked their hand. Mr. Ravi Kumar, please drop your question in the chat session, because we won't be taking direct questions from the audience. Please write your questions in the chat box so that we can forward the question to the speakers. If you want any particular speaker also to answer your question, you can also direct that question by putting their name. So I don't see any further questions in the chat box. I think the discussion done by both the speakers were so elaborate that people do not have much of questions to be asked. I have one question.
Okay,
yeah,
go ahead. I have
question.
two questions that I wanted to answer. Just wanted to bring up 2 points that I'd seen in Dr. Leena's presentation. So, but go ahead, Dr. Yamuna.
Yeah, just what the question which I have is our government agency or our government bodies are really allowing these reuse of single-use device will there be any an enforcement in due course, which will be coming from the government bodies, which says that, yes, you are allowed to reprocess? Like in US, we do have FDA, which has given them a norms that this is what you have to do, this is how you have to process, and you cannot reprocess in your area, but it should be done by a third party reprocessing. Are we looking forward anything in future by the government?
Yeah, I think this is something that the government of India is currently working on. I think the start, as I mentioned about right now, is starting from the manufacturers, because right now there is a lot of quality standards which the manufacturers themselves are not being able to maintain. So I think the government has started from there, is that now it has been mandatory that any importer, any manufacturer, whoever is bringing a medical device now, whether it is a simple cotton bud or whether it's a stent that you're looking at, it will be classified under medical device as A, B, C, or D. And based on that, you will have to follow certain regulations. And most manufacturers are being asked to maintain ISO 13485 standards, which is required for this thing that is there. But this point that should hospitals be reusing, now this is a debate that is still very much going on in the US. There is a number of parties that lobby against and for it. But I think in India, to reach a certain consensus, to reach some of our government officials, become a parliamentary law or any of those things, this will probably take a few more years, because still India is a maturing market. It's still not matured enough, but we will expect something going ahead as we go ahead. But it's important that we as hospitals set the benchmark, and I'm hoping that Apollo, which is the leading corporate organization, I think with the quality team that you have and the large network that you have, should actually take a step forward to benchmark some of these reuse these things. Because as we have seen reuse of devices, which the same device is being used 3 times, another hospital uses 5 times, another hospital uses 10 times. But that is all functional based that is there. But other than that, at least some of the other streamlining of some of the other processes and the steps need to be done properly, so that the reuse process can be handled much more safely.
One more question, which is always sticking in my mind. Is it that Made in India will make a change?
Probably the way that we look at devices being manufactured today in India is largely a replica of what is being used in the West. Most of us are going off patent products and then remanufacturing them over here in India, or similar devices which are being recalibrated or re-engineered to India. Now, unless we come up with a process that is able to reprocess some of these really well, because even the best of devices which are being designed for reprocessing, like for example, endoscopes, colonoscopes, an example that Madam just showed us, a simple suction device. Now the internals, how bad it was, despite reprocessing properly. This something is something that we will have to re-engineer right from the word go. That means the first building block itself should be something that is allowing you to reuse. But if you see today's most industry, they look to discard rather than reuse. So it's a fundamental change, not easy, but we hope it can be done.
Yeah. We will take one and final question as we are running out of time. I think this is directed to Dr. Leena. If I think they are not happy, means I think they mean by the organization, if they are not happy with the policy because of cost, for example, Octopus, and they want to use it more times, how to document it? And what is the sterility expiry date which you people are in your hospital you are recommending?
Okay, so for the Octopus, yes, if you want to include it in your single-use device, which is being followed in many institutes also, go step by step, sit with the committee, get the procurement cost, what it is for your particular institute. If you think it needs to be included in your single-use device list, go according to the SOP step by step, create a cleaning protocol for it, the sterilization part, check with the manufacturer definitely about the material. And then, there are many simulations that are carried on, and you can decide on the number of reuses accordingly, as we mentioned, based on some scientific evidence. And for octopus, yes, you would actually get some evidence based on the number of reuses, because there are mentions on it in many of the available literature. So yes, go step by step and have a lot of documentation, definitely, as to the traceability. You should be able to trace out which patient has used which octopus. And suppose you're having 5 or 6 octopuses, then please do, you can name them differently and have a patient series assigned to it. I think Dr. Shashank had shared a chart of a patient tracking of an octopus. In fact, I was very happy to see some, examples there, because I could trace it. I mean, those are actually from our institution. I could see our infection control nurse size signatures, and also I was very happy to see that these examples are being picked up and now being taught and trained all over. Good to see that. So yes, the octopus can be included in that sense. And for the sterility expiry date, see, it can have an expiry date, or it can be an event related sterility. In India, to trace it to an event is very difficult, or let's say in India, the condition is more for having it traced to setting up a date of expiry. And that needs to be validated, because it is not something that you can say for steam sterilization, it is so and so, or for gas sterilization, it is so and so. No, because it again depends on the packaging that you're using, the type of packaging, and the type of sterilization. So you will need to validate that at your end. And that will actually be varying according to the type of packaging material that you're using. In many places, still linen may be used for a lot of things. So if linen is being used, it will have definitely a very short expiry as compared to something like medical grade paper. So that is something that you would need to validate at your end and then fix it up with the committee.
Thank you so much, ma'am. About the duration of expiry date, also well said. So I would like to thank the speakers, all the participants, and people who have organized such a wonderful session in the pre-conference as a webinar. We also do have a pre-conference workshop, which is to be held on 11th of February. The registrations are still open. We welcome all the participants who have joined online, either through Zoom or YouTube, to please come forward and attend the wonderful conference, which is going to be held at New Delhi in Taj Palace between 13th to 14th, where we can have not an online interactive session, but a direct interactive session with our speakers, with the people who are expert in their field, in order to know the strategy, how to protect our patient and also have a quality care for our patients. Thank you so much. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Yamuna. Thank you, Dr. Leena.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, Dr. Yamuna.
Thanks, Rekha. Thanks, Soma.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Shashank. Thanks, Dr. Leena. Thanks, Dr. Yamuna.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.